Hello fringers and welcome back. This is the next video in my colorful cracker stitch series. We're diving into more ways to use color with cracker squares, also known as infinite one round granny squares. Today's focus includes 3 ways to do cracker stitch to build projects from the center out. We'll start with classic concentric squares, move on to an interesting variation, and then finish up with the pros and pitfalls of using color-changing yarns with this sort of design. Also keep in mind that I will only be demonstrating what's new and different from what I've already covered in previous videos. So if you are totally new to cracker stitch, then please make sure you watch the Infinite One Round Grannies tutorial and have a practice of the stitch to make the most out of what's going on here. Let's start with concentric squares. This is a design that starts with a section of color in the center, and each new section of color makes a border around the previous section. So we could say that once we work the central section, the rest of the project is nothing but a really big border, worked one color at a time. The good news is you already know how to make this beginning section. It is worked in back and forth rows, just like in the Infinite One Round Grannies video. The center section can be any size you want, and can even be a rectangle. Obviously, the finished shape of your piece depends upon the shape that you start with. For this tutorial, let's work a sample that starts with a center section that is 2 cracker squares wide and 2 cracker squares high. Make this square by adding the first 2 squares on the foundation row, a return row, make another foundation row of 2 squares, return row, and finally finish the left edge. Now it's time to start adding borders around our central square. To keep things simple, let's begin with the first border that is only 1 round of cracker squares. I'll show you how to do a border with more rounds later on. Using a new color of yarn, start this section separately from the main piece. Begin with a handbag. When I say handbag, that is my abbreviation for doing the floating double crochet and the 2 double crochets in the floating ring. I call it a handbag because that's what it looks like. Next, chain 2, granny cluster, chain 1, and now let's join the square to the main piece in the top left-hand corner. Make sure you're going into an actual chain and not the chain 2 space. Continue with chain 1, granny cluster, chain 1, and we're going to join the next corner, just in that slip stitch that we made before. Chain 1, granny cluster, and end with chain 2. Now continue along the edge as if doing a foundation row in cracker stitch. This means working a series of grid squares until we get to each corner. In this case, we only have one more to do. And just to review, a grid square is worked by first doing a handbag, chain 1, join into the same place we did before, chain 1, another granny cluster, chain 1, and now we've got a corner space. Again, I would like you to go through an actual chain and not through the chain 2 space. Chain 1, one more granny cluster, chain 2. Now that we are at the end of this edge, we have a new square to make. A corner square sits right in the corner and helps us make the transition from the current edge to the next one without everything buckling up. So, to make a corner square, start with a handbag, chain 1, and join in the same chain as you did before. Chain 1, work a granny cluster in the floating ring, and chain 2. Continue along the next 3 edges, working grid squares along each edge and remembering to put corner squares in each corner. As we are going along, just have a look at what the corners should look like. We have a grid square that is on this row, and the corner square, and then the first square of this edge. Notice that these 3 squares join in the same place in the corner. Now I've paused here because, as you can see, we need one more corner square to finish this row. As we work this corner square, we will be joining it to the very first square of the row. To do this, start as usual with a handbag, chain 1, and make a join between the last square and the first one, right in the corner. Chain 1, granny cluster, chain 1, and now let's make that final join into the first square, and again go through a chain and not through the space. End with a chain 1, and now you can see how the whole round is totally joined together. Time now for the return row, which is where we finish all the squares we started in the previous row. To do the return row over a corner square, make sure you've got that chain 1, and then do another granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster, and finish this square with a chain 1, slip stitch into the chain 2 space, and chain 1. Then you will just continue the usual return sequence around each grid square and each corner square, and I'll meet you back when we get to this top square here. And just remember, the return sequence over a grid square is granny cluster, chain 1, slip stitch into the chain 2 space, chain 1. And at the end of the round on this top square, it's time to close things off. So after the granny cluster on the last square we did, just do chain 1, slip stitch in the chain 2 space, chain 1, and slip stitch into the next stitch. Notice that it is the same stitch that has the yarn tail, so we've ended up in the right place. You can now finish off the yarn in this color. Repeat this basic process for each time you want to work a border in a new color that is only one round of cracker squares. For borders that are more than one round of cracker squares, then there is a different sequence to follow. This sequence might seem a bit out of order, but hear me out, and you will see why we have to do things as I'm about to show you. The first thing to do is to decide how many rounds of cracker squares you want the new border to have. In this demo, let's do a 3-round border. Again, we will start the new border separately from the main piece. And this first sequence involves making what I call a spine. The spine is basically a foundation row that contains the first 3 squares on each round of the border. Since we are doing a 3-round border, then this means our spine is basically a foundation row that has 3 cracker squares. So that's a lot to take in. Let me show you what I mean. Let's start the first square of the spine with a handbag, chain 2, granny cluster, chain 2, and one more granny cluster. Finish that off with a chain 2. Moving on to the next square, work your first handbag, chain 1, and join it up to the first square, going through a chain in the chain 2 space. Chain 1, granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster, chain 2. There's our second square of a spine. Now we're working the third and final square of this spine. Again, starting with the handbag, chain 1, join the first corner to the previous square, chain 1, granny cluster, and chain 1. So let's look at our finished spine and its anatomy, in case you were wanting to make a border that's either wider or narrower than 3 squares. For each spine, you've got the beginning square, you've got a middle square or more squares, and the connecting square, which eventually will be joined up to our main piece that we're working on. So if you wanted more than 3 squares in your border, you would repeat this second square until you get to one less number of the squares you need. So if I wanted 4 squares, I would repeat this second square twice. If I only wanted 2 squares in the border, I would leave this second square off altogether and go straight from the beginning square to the connecting square. Now let's join our spine to the main piece. And again, we'll do it in the top left-hand corner, going through a chain and not the space. After that, chain 1, and continue on this square with another granny cluster, chain 1, and join this next corner into the next chain or slip stitch on the main piece. We're not quite finished. We've got to do one more chain, granny cluster, chain 2. And that is our spine completed. So to get our bearings, here is how the spine relates to the main piece. As you can see, we've already started the first square of each round. So from here, all you need to do is carry on around the square with a foundation row, just like we did on the other sample. So things should look just like the first sample, except for the spine poking up above. Continue now with a return row until you get back to this square here. Now that we are at the end of the round, there's another special operation to do. After the granny cluster, do a chain 1, and now we need to find the next 2 chain 2 spaces. One is on the row and the other is on the spine. We need to join those 2 spaces up with a slip stitch. So go through a chain, not the chain 2 space, of each one, and join through all those layers with a slip stitch, and that has secured our round 1 of cracker squares. Now it is important to say here that if we changed our mind and did not want to go on to 2 more rounds of squares, then we're a bit stuck, because we've already committed to these rows by making the spine. And the bad news, it's very difficult to undo these squares. This emphasizes the need to plan ahead. But if you're not really sure how many rounds you want to do for a new border, then I recommend not using the spine method and instead work round by round as for the first sample, cutting the yarn between each round and starting again, even though you are using the same color each time. In the end, it's like adding salt to a dish. It's easier to add more later than it is to take away. Time now to jump up to the second round. And looking again at our spine, you can see that we've already started the first square of this row. All we need to do now is to take another bite out of this square before we continue on. So to do that, continue with chain 1, and in the spine square, work a granny cluster. Chain 2, and now we're ready to carry on with our foundation row all the way around. Notice at the end of this foundation row, it looks a little bit different because we need an extra grid square between the corner square and the spine. Just work it as usual, making sure to join in these 3 places before you start a return row. Now time to finish off this return row, and again we slip stitch these 2 chain 2 spaces together. Just remember to chain 1 first, then go through both spaces through an actual chain and slip stitch those together. Then chain 1, and that's finished that round, and time to go up to the next 3rd row of squares. Work a granny cluster into the next spine square and chain 2. Now you're ready for the next foundation row. And at the end of this last foundation row, we just join in again to this next chain 2 space, just like we've done before. And then we head back around with our return row. And you will end this 3rd round, as usual, with just a chain 1, slip stitch, chain 1, and slip stitch into the first stitch. And you can fasten off the yarn. So to add more rounds on, if you want only 1 round, then just repeat like for the first sample. If you want 2 or more, then start with a new spine and follow the same sequence as we did for this. Now I know a lot of you might be thinking, well, instead of making just one big piece that starts from the center out and goes all the way to the edges, well, why not make some smaller pieces in different colors and join them together, either in a kind of a regular way or, kind of random. And I agree. I think that would make a very nice piece. But there is just one issue with that. So one of the golden rules of this kind of cracker stitch is to not make joins when you are on a return row, which is what every edge of these squares will be. We can't make joins there because number 1, it's a different technique, and number 2, the seam looks different along the join as compared to the rest of the piece. So if you're wanting a nice fluid line between 2 pieces that are the same color, you're not really going to get that when you are joining 2 return edges. However, if you are joining 2 different colors, like this sample here, well, the seam does look a little bit different, but because we've got 2 different colors, that seam is a little bit less glaring. But in any case, if you're thinking about a project such as this, maybe hold off a while before you start making any pieces, because I do have a video planned later on to show you how to go about things. Now for something a little bit different. Here's a piece that I've been playing around with, and I've gotten a totally different look by playing around with the color changes. So what I did here is I have started off with a center square here. I've worked a foundation row around the center square, and then I thought, what would happen if I didn't do the return row in the same color, but changed it? So at the end of this kind of blue foundation row, I changed the pink and did the return row. And likewise, when it was time for another foundation row, I changed color again. So by changing color between foundation row and return row, and using 3 colors over what's essentially a 2-round repeat, you get this sort of design that kind of looks like you've done a lot more work than you actually have. So let's go over how to start a project such as this and how to join in the colors after foundation and return rows. And for this tutorial, I might slide over to this sample where there's a bit more contrast between colors, which might make it a little bit easier to see. But while we're here, you can see how a more subtle contrast in colors gives you kind of this softer effect. And if you want something stronger, go with a bolder contrast in colors. Okay, to get this kind of center cross looking shape, we are going to start here with a handbag, make this square all the way around, and then we can continue with the foundation row. So let's have a closer look at how to do that. As usual, begin with a handbag, chain 2, work another granny cluster into this floating ring. And now chain 2, and that is our first edging section, so to speak. We're going to move now to the very center cracker square of this piece. So again, start with a handbag, chain 1. Let's join it up to the previous square. Again, through the chain 1, and let's work all the way around with all the granny clusters in this center square. And of course, remembering to put chain 2 between each granny cluster. Let's finish this off with chain 1, slip stitch in the chain 2 space, chain 1, and now let's move from the center back out to the first square that will sit on the edge. Just need one more granny cluster here, chain 2, and now you're ready to go the rest of the way around. So this is how this little piece sits in the main scheme of things. All right, so you can see how you continue with a corner square, corner, grid, all the way around. And at the end of the foundation row, after this corner square, just finish things off with the chain 2 and a slip stitch into the first square. And you can fasten off the yarn. And let's go on to the next return row in a different color. So this return row can really start anywhere. I like starting in one of the grid squares. And as you can see, we only need one more granny cluster here. And this time we actually start attached to the main piece. So start that any way you like. However you join the next row in a granny square. I like to come from mid-air again. And just work your first granny cluster. And continue with the return sequence all the way around. And you finish up just like before with a chain 1, slip stitch in the chain 2 space, chain 1, slip stitch into the next stitch, and this is where you fasten off the yarn. And from now on, to start a new foundation row in a new color, again, we start away from the main piece with a handbag, chain 1, and now we're ready to come back to our main piece. And why not join in the same place in the top left-hand corner, just like we did before. Chain 1, granny cluster, chain 1, join, chain 1, granny cluster, chain 2, etc. So you already know how to go around and do a foundation row. So that's all we're doing. The only difference from now on is just changing colors between the foundation row and return row, but making sure you start the foundation rows just like I just did here, and the return rows start with an actual granny cluster into one of the squares. And finally, as promised, I'd like to talk about using color changing yarn and variegated yarns with this sort of stitch working from the center out. Now, as you can see, this particular yarn has a fair amount of length before it changes to a new color. And you can see how it makes an effect kind of like the previous square of things changing between return rows and foundation rows. And you can still pretty much see the edges of the borders, all right, that spread out. But the only glaring thing poking out at us here is the spine. So as you can see here, I start the spine in one color, start working my way around, and as we come back to the spine, we are going to be ending up with a whole new different color, and we will end up with kind of this vertical line here, which interrupts the edges of the borders, all right, which I don't like that at all. All right. So to avoid that, the only thing I could think of to do, and you're not going to like this probably, but that is to change the yarn or cut the yarn after every round of squares. So at the end of each return row, finish off the yarn and then start somewhere else to kind of stagger things a bit. You can see where I've started here and gone around. All right. So by doing that, you are preserving the edges of the borders, but you will have more ends to weave in. So sorry about that. Let's look at another sample with a different yarn. And here we have color changes that are a bit closer together. The colors within the bowl are fairly highly contrasted. And I did change or cut the yarn after every return row with this sample. And because the colors changes happen a bit more quickly, you get more of this kind of mottled look, which, you know, you lose the edges of the border somewhat, but you still get a very interesting effect with the color, which I don't mind. So that's something else to keep in mind with this sort of color changing yarn. And lastly, let's look at a piece where we have colors that are very close together, you know, a blue and a kind of a aqua green kind of thing. And the color changes happen very quickly. And as you can see, you can't really see the borders defined at all right? No definition. So in this case, there's really no reason to start from the center out with this sort of yarn because you're not getting the effect that we are after. Rather, with a yarn like this, you're better off working back and forth in rows. You won't really see a difference in the color effect. So this brings us to the end of this tutorial. I hope I've whetted your appetite for a bunch of interesting new projects. If you have a go making something, I'd love to see what you make. And as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.